Welcome to Liturgy of Fear. Tonight's story takes us to 1893, to a small forgotten town where the world believed certain minds were never meant to rise, especially in a body the system had already decided was less. Her name was Bella Adams, 9 years old, brown eyes, quiet voice, and a mind that didn't just learn, her mind kept everything. Every word, every page, every diagram, every pattern. This is not just a story about slavery's shadow, it's about what happens when brilliance shows up where power swore it never could. So before we begin, subscribe and tell me in the comments which city and country you're listening from. Because remembering these stories out loud is how we keep them from being buried twice. It started with a telegram. A rain-soaked evening in September 1893, Philadelphia General Hospital received an urgent message from rural Delaware. The sender was Dr. William Cross, a country physician with 3 decades of work behind him. Steady, respected, and not known for drama, he wasn't the kind of man who sent wild claims to big city hospitals. But that night his handwriting shook. He wrote about a colored girl, about 9 years old, daughter of a washerwoman in a town called Millbrook, a child who walked into his clinic while he examined a farmer complaining of chest trouble and indigestion. The farmer looked ordinary, tired, sweaty, defensive, saying it was nothing. Then the girl watched him, silent, still, like she was reading a page nobody else could see. And after less than a minute, she tugged at Dr. Cross's sleeve and whispered something that made his stomach drop. Not a child's guess. Not fear, not superstition, a calm warning. She told him the man's pain didn't fit the story he was telling. She pointed out small signs a trained doctor could miss when the room felt routine. She said if the man didn't stop moving and lie down, he could collapse soon. Dr. Cross froze, then looked again with new eyes. And suddenly, the details lined up in a way he didn't like. He ordered the farmer onto the table, sent for help, and treated it like an emergency. That decision saved the man's life, because it wasn't indigestion. Something serious was happening inside that farmer's body, and a 9-year-old girl had seen it first. After the danger passed, Dr. Cross turned to Bella, voice low and unsteady. "How did you know?" Bella didn't smile. She didn't brag. She didn't act like she'd done anything special. She answered like someone explaining the weather. "I read about it in a medical book, sir. I remember everything I read." Dr. Cross stared. A medical book, a black child in 1893, no schooling, no library card, no access. He asked her where she could have possibly read such a thing. Bella explained simply she cleaned offices with her mother. And sometimes, a doctor left textbooks open on his desk, while her mother scrubbed and worked. Bella looked at the pages. She looked once, and it stayed. Dr. Cross didn't believe it, so he tested her. He opened random pages in his own books and asked her to read. She did. Then he asked her to repeat it later. She did. He showed her diagrams, asked her to identify structures. She did, confidently, clearly, like she'd been living in those pages for years, not just memorizing, understanding. And that terrified him more than anything. Because if Bella was real, then the rulers everyone lived by weren't rules at all. They were lies. So Dr. Cross wrote one last line in the telegram, less like a doctor, more like a man asking for mercy. "I don't know what to do with this child. Someone with greater resources must examine her and help her become what she is capable of becoming." The telegram reached Dr. James Whitfield, head of internal medicine at Philadelphia General Hospital, an ambitious physician with a reputation for chasing strange cases other men laughed at. Whitfield read it once, then again, then a third time. He waited 2 days, trying to convince himself it was nonsense. But he couldn't. On the 3rd day, he boarded a train for Delaware. Because whether the story was true or not, one fact mattered. A child like that, if she existed, would not be allowed to exist for long without someone trying to control her. Whitfield arrived in Millbrook and walked to the edge of town, past the neat houses, past the safer streets toward the area everyone pretended wasn't part of the town at all. He found a small house with tired windows and a porch that sagged like it had given up. A woman answered the door, around 30, hands raw from constant work, face worn by the kind of life that doesn't allow rest. She didn't ask why a white doctor was there. She didn't act surprised. She just stepped aside and called into the dark, "Bella." And then the girl appeared, small, thin, hair braided carefully, and her eyes brown, ordinary in color, but not ordinary in weight. She looked at Whitfield the way a doctor looks at a patient, not rude, not scared, just aware. "Good afternoon, sir," she said softly. Whitfield felt something he didn't like, the feeling that he was the one being examined. He asked her about the farmer. Bella answered calmly, explaining what she noticed and why it mattered, as if she was simply matching reality to knowledge, like laying two transparent pages over each other until the truth aligned. Whitfield asked the question out loud that was forming like a storm inside him. "How is this possible?" Bella glanced at her mother, then said, almost apologetically, "I don't know, sir. I just read and it stays, and when I see sick people it matches." Whitfield spent hours testing her anatomy, symptoms, logic cases, and every time he expected a wall, there wasn't one. He finally turned to her mother. "What is her full name?" "Isabella Grace Adams," the woman said. "But everybody calls her Bella." Whitfield nodded slowly, like he was realizing he'd walked into something far bigger than a gifted child. Because if Bella Adams was real, then she wasn't just a miracle. She was a threat, not to medicine, to the entire structure of what America claimed to know. Whitfield looked at the mother, Grace Adams, and said what he'd come to say. "I want to bring her to Philadelphia, with your permission, to examine her properly, to teach her, to protect her." Grace didn't melt at the offer. She didn't thank him. She stared straight through him and asked the only question that mattered. Why would a white doctor care what happens to a colored girl? Whitfield answered the best way he could. Because Bella could save lives. Because her mind challenged everything he thought he understood. Because ignoring her would be a kind of cowardice dressed up as normal. Grace listened. Then she said something that landed like a warning shot. "Men have promised help before, and then they used us." And in that moment, the real story revealed itself. Not just about Bella's gift, but about what the world does to gifts it cannot control. Grace made her condition. "If she goes anywhere, I go too." Bella didn't hesitate. "I want to learn," she said. "I want the whole ocean." And Grace, with fear in her throat, chose her daughter's future anyway. Whitfield agreed. And the decision was made. A week later, they would leave Millbrook. And the moment Bella entered Philadelphia, power would notice her. And power would not be gentle. They left Millbrook the way most poor people leave places like that, quietly, with no parade, no well-wishers, no one waving from the porch like it mattered. A washerwoman and her child, carrying everything they owned in a few bags, boarding a train that smelled of coal smoke and metal and other people's tired lives. Grace Adams kept Bella close the entire ride, not out of affection, though that was there, but out of instinct. The kind of instinct a mother develops when the world has spent her whole life proving it will take what it wants if you blink. Bella watched the passing fields through the window and said almost nothing. Her mind was already somewhere else, already building a map of what she would find in Philadelphia. Books, hospitals, libraries, a whole ocean. Grace, on the other hand, was listening to every sound in the train car, every white voice, every laugh, every pause, measuring danger the way poor women learn to measure it, not by what people say, but by what they're capable of saying next. Dr. James Whitfield sat across from them, formal, controlled. He had promised help. But Grace had lived long enough to know promises came cheap, especially when you were black, especially when the promise involved learning and science, because science had been used like a weapon before. And deep down, Grace already understood something Whitfield was only beginning to realize. If Bella's gift was real, the world wouldn't celebrate it. The world would try to own it. Philadelphia in 1893 rose around them like a contradiction made of stone. It was a city of polished mansions and filthy alleys so close together that you could walk from wealth into hunger in a few blocks. Carriages rolling past barefoot children. Concert halls feeding off money earned in factories where workers' lungs turned black. And at the center of this machine stood Philadelphia General Hospital, one of the premier medical institutions in the country. A place that trained doctors who would shape medicine's future. A place that believed in progress. But progress in America always came with a condition. Progress was for some people. For others, progress meant being experimented on. Whitfield did not bring Bella through the front door. He brought her through a side entrance, early, avoiding crowds. The hospital had rules even if they were unwritten, and the sight of a black child walking into white medical space like she belonged there would have triggered exactly the kind of attention that turned curious into cruel. Whitfield arranged for Bella and Grace to stay in a boarding house in the colored section of the city. The place was modest, clean, and run by a widow named Mrs. Thompson, a woman who had seen enough unusual arrangements to know that questions could cost you your peace. Grace didn't like being placed anywhere by a white man, but she liked homelessness even less. So she accepted. For now, the testing began immediately. Whitfield wasn't reckless. He was curious, dangerously curious, but he understood this needed proof, not whispers, not rumors, not a story, a record. So he treated Bella like a case study. He sat her at a table in his office with medical textbooks, meant for students older than she'd ever live to become if this world stayed the way it was. He opened pages at random, watched her eyes move across the lines, then shut the book and waited. Repeat it. Bella repeated every sentence, every punctuation mark, the same cadence, like the page had been burned into her mind. Whitfield changed the test. He didn't want memory alone. Memory was impressive, but memory could be dismissed as a trick. Memory could be explained away with the kind of excuses men like Cornelius Webb lived on. So Whitfield tested comprehension. He asked her to explain concepts in her own words, not to recite, to teach him. Bella did. Sometimes her explanations were clearer than the textbooks themselves, and the way she spoke wasn't like a child mimicking adult language. It was like a mind moving too fast for its own body, forced to slow down just so others could keep up. Whitfield brought in colleagues, not many, not yet. Carefully chosen men who were less likely to laugh the whole thing off and more likely to observe like scientists. But even the good ones came in skeptical. They expected a parlor trick. They expected a coached act. They expected a fraud. What they found was worse. They found a child who made them feel stupid, and people do not forgive the person who makes them feel small. The first physician Whitfield invited was Dr. Edward Marsh, an anatomy professor from the University of Pennsylvania's medical world. A man who believed in systems, credentials, and the natural order. He sat Bella in front of diagrams and asked her to identify structures. She did. He increased the difficulty, moving beyond labeled drawings into complex descriptions, obscure terms, deeper detail. She did. He tried to trick her twice with slightly incorrect phrasing, the kind professors use to catch students who memorize without understanding. Bella corrected him politely, but corrected him. Marsh sat back after 4 hours like someone coming out of a fever. "This child knows anatomy better than half my students," he admitted, voice low, like he didn't want his own words to hear themselves. "Not just facts, understanding." Whitfield watched him closely. "And what does that mean to you?" Whitfield asked. Marsh didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer would sound like heresy. It would mean the entire structure of what men like Marsh believed about race and intelligence was wrong. Not a little wrong, a lie. The second physician was Dr. Robert Sullivan, a heart specialist, chosen on purpose because Bella's story began with a heart. Sullivan gave Bella a clinical description of a complex case he'd seen recently, one he had not discussed publicly, not written about, not taught, not published. Bella listened, eyes focused, expression still. Then she spoke. She diagnosed it quickly, and then, quietly, she suggested a treatment approach. Sullivan's eyebrows lifted. He didn't correct her on the spot. He simply stared at her, as if waiting for someone to shout, "Gotcha!" But no one did. Later, he went back through the literature and found her approach was not only plausible, it was sound, better than his first plan. Sullivan came out of Whitfield's office looking pale. "If I'd thought of that," he said slowly, "the patient might have recovered faster." Whitfield nodded, and in that moment something shifted from curiosity into inevitability. Bella wasn't just impressive, Bella was useful. And in a world built on power, anything useful becomes property. Whitfield understood the next danger before Grace did, because Grace had lived the danger in one form, men wanting her labor, her obedience, her silence. Whitfield had lived a different danger, institutions protecting themselves by destroying inconvenient truths. He knew what would happen when word spread, and it did spread. It started as whispers in hallways, A joke told at a dinner table. A rumor passed between colleagues. Have you heard? Whitfield has a little colored prodigy who reads medical books like scripture. Some laughed. Some came to see the show. Some grew quiet, because for certain men Bella's existence was not merely uncomfortable. It was a threat. It was a crack in the wall. And cracks spread. Grace began to see it too, in the way Whitfield suddenly became cautious. The way he stopped letting Bella walk through certain corridors. The way he insisted on private instruction instead of public demonstrations. The way he started choosing words carefully, like the air itself was listening. Grace didn't like that. She asked him one evening in the boarding house, voice calm but edged, "Doctor, is she safe?" Whitfield hesitated. That hesitation was an answer. "She's safe today," he said. Grace felt her chest tighten. "Tomorrow?" she asked. Whitfield didn't promise. He couldn't. Because the moment this became bigger than his office, bigger than his control, it would belong to something older and uglier than any single man. It would belong to a system that had always believed black people were meant to be handled, not honored. Bella listened from the corner of the room, reading a medical journal like it was nothing. And then she said something that chilled Grace. "Mama," she said softly, "people don't like it when something doesn't match the picture in their head." Grace looked at her daughter. Bella's eyes were steady. "They'll try to fix it." Bella continued, "They'll try to make me fit their picture. Or they'll try to break me so the picture stays true." Whitfield stared at her like she'd just diagnosed the future. Because she had. A week later, the first formal letter arrived. It wasn't hateful, not openly. It was polite, professional, almost kind. It came from a respected psychiatrist and professor at Jefferson Medical College, Dr. Cornelius Webb. The name hit Whitfield like a bad taste. Webb was not just a physician. He was one of the rising architects of racial science. The kind of man who published papers about skull measurements and brain weights and used that fake precision to prove a conclusion he'd already decided: white supremacy as natural law. His work was cited in courts, in political speeches, in universities. It gave educated men permission to feel righteous in their cruelty. Webb's letter requested permission to examine the child. He framed it as scientific interest. He claimed he wanted to verify the methodology, protect the medical community from embarrassment, ensure the truth was handled properly. Whitfield read it once, then again, then fold it slowly like the paper itself carried poison. Grace saw Whitfield's face. "What is it?" she asked. Whitfield didn't want to say the name out loud, but he did. Cornelius Webb. Grace didn't know the man, but she knew the type. "What does he want?" she asked. "To see Bella," Whitfield said. Grace's hands tightened around the edge of the table. "To see her or to take her?" she asked. Whitfield didn't answer quickly enough. That was all Grace needed. That night, Grace sat with Bella on the bed in their small room, the city's distant noise pressing against the windows. "Baby," Grace whispered, "if it gets dangerous, we leave. We go back." Bella's eyes didn't lift from the page immediately. When she finally looked up, her voice was calm. "If we go back," she said, "I'll spend my life cleaning other people's rooms and reading through windows." Grace swallowed. Bella continued quietly, "Here I can learn. I can become what I'm supposed to be." Grace tried to hold herself steady. "Sometimes the world punishes people for being what they're supposed to be," she said. Bella nodded once, like she already knew. Then she said something that made Whitfield's blood run cold when Grace repeated it to him later. "He has to see me," Bella said. "Because if he doesn't, he'll say I'm not real, and people will believe him because they want to." Grace stared at her child. Bella's voice stayed steady. "But if he sees me, then he has two choices. He admits the truth or he lies." Grace whispered, "And if he lies?" Bella's eyes sharpened. "Then we make everybody else see that he's lying." Whitfield had been planning like a doctor. Bella was planning like someone born into a war. And Whitfield realized fully that his miracle case was not a case at all. It was a battle line. If Webb examined Bella, Webb would not come to learn. He would come to control the story, to rewrite it, to bury the threat Bella represented beneath professional language and official papers and concern. Whitfield knew refusing would provoke Webb. Allowing it would endanger Bella. Either way, the trap was already closing. So Whitfield made a decision. He would allow the examination, but not privately, not in a back room, not where a child could be isolated and labeled and disappeared. He would do it in a lecture hall with witnesses. He would control the rules as much as possible, and he would pray the rules meant anything when power decided it didn't. Grace agreed only because Bella insisted, and because Grace had learned something terrifying. Sometimes survival isn't about avoiding the fight. Sometimes survival is choosing where the fight happens. On the calendar, it became a date, October 15th, 1893, a public examination, a lecture hall, a child in a chair, and a room full of white men who believed she shouldn't exist. The night before, Grace braided Bella's hair with shaking hands. "You don't have to do this," Grace whispered. Bella met her mother's eyes in the mirror. "I do," she said, "because if I don't, they'll write my story without me." Whitfield met them at the hospital early, face tight. He explained the rules again. He promised he'd stop it if it became abusive. Bella listened and then said, very softly, "You can't promise that. Nobody can." And Whitfield, hearing the truth, felt something like shame. Because this child understood the world better than he did. The next morning, they walked toward the lecture hall, toward the witnesses, toward Dr. Cornelius Webb, toward the moment when Bella Adams would either become undeniable or become a target. And the worst part was this: even if she won, she might lose. Because in America, when you embarrass powerful men in public, they don't forget. They don't forgive. They just start planning. The morning of October 15th, 1893 did not feel like a beginning. It felt like a verdict waiting to be announced. Philadelphia woke under a low, gray sky, the kind that pressed down on the city and made even large buildings feel small. Bella woke before dawn, sitting upright in the narrow bed of the boarding house, already dressed. She had slept lightly, not because of fear, but because her mind would not slow itself enough to rest. Grace watched her daughter eat quietly. No appetite, no chatter, no childlike nerves, just focus. Grace wanted to beg her again to stop, to leave, to disappear back into obscurity where at least no one would be trying to break her. But Grace had lived long enough to recognize a terrible truth. Some children are not built for hiding, and trying to force them into it only crushes them faster. Whitfield arrived precisely at 8. His coat was buttoned too tightly. His jaw set the way it only got when he knew he was walking into a fight he could not fully control. They entered the hospital through a side corridor. Even so, word had spread. Doctors lingered in hallways pretending to read charts. Orderlies slowed their steps. Curious eyes followed Bella, not with kindness, but with calculation. She was an object before she was a person, a problem before she was a child. The lecture hall was already filling when they arrived. Whitfield had hoped for a dozen observers. There were closer to 40. Not because they had been invited, but because men like to witness moments that might become legend or disgrace. Especially if it isn't their reputation on the line. Bella was guided to a chair at the center of the room. It was too large for her small body. Her feet didn't reach the floor. Her hands folded neatly in her lap. Grace took a seat near the back, heart hammering so loudly she was sure others could hear it. Then Dr. Cornelius Webb entered. He did not hurry. He did not acknowledge Grace. He barely glanced at Whitfield. His eyes went straight to Bella, cold, appraising, dismissive, like a man inspecting livestock. "So," Webb said loudly, letting his voice carry, "this is the child, not who." This. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. Whitfield stepped forward immediately. "Dr. Webb," he said sharply, "we agreed to conduct this examination professionally." Webb smiled thinly. "Of course. I'm merely observing." He took his seat at the front table, flanked by 2 colleagues who shared his views on racial science. They sat with the confidence of men who believed the world had already chosen their side. Bella looked at Webb calmly. No fear, no flinch. Webb noticed. That irritated him. "Can you read?" Webb asked abruptly.
"Yes, sir," Bella replied.
"And who taught you?" "I taught myself." A few men chuckled. Webb leaned back. "You expect us to believe a Negro child taught herself to read medical literature?" "I don't expect anything," Bella said evenly. "You asked me a question. I answered it." The chuckling stopped. Whitfield felt a ripple of tension move through the room. Webb narrowed his eyes. "Let's test that claim," he said. He handed Bella a thick medical text, open to a random page. "Read." Bella took the book gently. Her eyes moved across the lines without hesitation. She read aloud, perfect pronunciation, flawless cadence, not rushing, not guessing. When she finished, Webb snapped the book shut. "Close your eyes. Repeat it." Bella did, word for word, not a syllable out of place. A murmur spread through the audience. Men leaned forward, pens scratched faster. Webb's expression didn't change, but something behind it hardened. "Memorization," he said dismissively. "Parlor tricks. Colored performers have done this for decades." Bella looked at him. "Then test my thinking, sir," she said quietly. "Not my memory." A few heads turned. Webb hadn't expected that. "Very well," he said tightly. "A patient presents with severe abdominal pain, fever and vomiting. Rebound tenderness on examination. Diagnosis: likely acute appendicitis with peritonitis." Bella answered after only a few seconds. "Immediate surgical intervention is required. Delay increases mortality." Correct, but Webb waved it away. "Simple. Any student could answer that." "Then give me a difficult one," Bella said. The audacity of it made Webb flush. He shuffled his papers and chose one he had prepared carefully. A rare case, complex, obscure. A patient presents with progressive muscle weakness, double vision worsening through the day, drooping eyelids, difficulty swallowing, no sensory loss. Diagnosis. The room went silent. This was not basic. Bella closed her eyes, not dramatically, not for show, but because she was searching. Her voice came steady. "The pattern suggests dysfunction at the neuromuscular junction. Muscle fatigability, bulbar involvement, ocular symptoms that worsen with use. This is consistent with myasthenia gravis." Several men inhaled sharply. Webb stiffened. "That condition was only recently described." He snapped. "How do you know it?" "I've read case descriptions that match the pattern," Bella said. "The name comes later. The disease comes first. And then something extraordinary happened." She paused. "No, wait. I misspoke about the publication date. That paper hasn't been published yet. I read earlier cases. The formal classification is newer." She corrected herself. In real time. The room exploded into whispers. This wasn't memorization. This was active reasoning. Webb's voice sharpened. "You've been coached. Then ask me something no one could have coached me for." Bella said calmly. "Describe a patient you've seen. One no one else knows about." Webb hesitated, and everyone saw it. If he refused, he looked afraid. If he accepted, he risked humiliation. He accepted. He described a complex case: joint pain, kidney involvement, neurological symptoms, leaving out one detail intentionally. Bella listened, then spoke. "Systemic lupus erythematosus," she said. "Autoimmune. Multi-system involvement, possibly affecting the brain or kidneys." Webb's face went pale. "I didn't mention a rash," he snapped. "You said skin findings," Bella replied. "Patients with this pattern often have a butterfly-shaped facial rash." Did the patient? Silence. Webb didn't answer, because the answer was yes, and everyone knew it. Whitfield leaned forward. "Dr. Webb, does her diagnosis match yours?" Webb swallowed. The diagnosis was confirmed. The room erupted. Webb stood abruptly, chair scraping. "This proves nothing," he shouted. "This child is mentally abnormal. Her abilities are pathological symptoms of a diseased brain. She should be institutionalized and studied." Grace surged to her feet. "You will not touch my child." The room descended into chaos. Doctors argued. Voices rose. Whitfield moved between Webb and Bella instinctively. Bella remained seated, watching, understanding, because she saw it clearly now. The examination wasn't about intelligence. It never was. It was about control. And she had just taken it from a man who had built his life on believing she should never have it. The examination ended without resolution. But the damage was done, not to Bella, to Webb. And men like Webb do not accept public defeat. They retreat. They document. They plan. As Grace held Bella that night, Whitfield said the words that chilled them both. "He will not let this stand." Bella nodded. "I know," she said. "People don't forgive you for proving them wrong." 3 months later, Webb would make his move. And it would not come in a lecture hall. It would come in the dark. The danger did not arrive loudly. It didn't kick down doors or shout threats in public halls. It arrived the way real power always does, quietly, officially wrapped in paper. For 3 months after the examination, life pretended to settle. On the surface, Bella's education continued. Whitfield arranged private instruction, bringing in physicians who were willing, some curious, some cautious, some motivated by genuine belief. Bella absorbed everything: anatomy, diagnostics, pathology, surgical theory. She learned faster than anyone Whitfield had ever taught, not because she rushed, but because her mind organized information automatically, sorting truth from error, pattern from noise. Grace found work as a seamstress in the city's colored district. Long hours, low pay, but enough to stand on her own feet instead of Whitfield's charity. She insisted on that. Dependence made you vulnerable. For a brief moment, just a brief one, it felt like maybe the world would tolerate Bella's existence if she stayed quiet enough, small enough, hidden enough. But that was an illusion, because men like Cornelius Webb do not retreat when embarrassed. They regroup. Webb spent those 3 months doing what he did best: writing, not with anger, not with panic, with precision. He reviewed his notes from the examination, not to learn from them, but to rewrite them. He combed through his own published theories, searching for language that could absorb Bella's existence without collapsing his worldview. He didn't deny her abilities. That would have been too obvious, too easy to disprove. Instead, he reframed them. If Bella was intelligent, then intelligence itself had to be redefined in a way that excluded her. And Webb knew exactly how to do that. On January 8, 1894, the article appeared in print, the American Journal of Psychiatry. Tightly aberrant mental development in Negro subjects, a case study in pathological savantism. Whitfield saw it 3 days later. A colleague handed him the journal without a word, sympathy written all over his face. Whitfield read the title once, then flipped pages with growing dread. The article never used Bella's name. It didn't need to. She was referred to only as Subject B, a female Negro child of approximately 9 years. Webb acknowledged her memory, her knowledge, her diagnostic ability. Then he dismantled them. According to Webb, Bella's abilities were not intelligence, they were pathology, symptoms of a malformed brain. He compared her to so-called savants, people who could calculate numbers or recall facts, but were allegedly incapable of true reasoning. He claimed her mind lacked judgment, moral stability, and emotional regulation. And then he crossed a line that turned theory into a weapon. Webb wrote that Subject B had shown signs of aggression, paranoia, and emotional instability during examination, that she posed a potential danger to herself and others, that individuals like her required confinement in controlled environments for their own protection and the safety of society. It was a lie, a carefully constructed one, because once something appeared in a respected journal, it stopped being opinion, it became record. Whitfield felt sick. This wasn't science. This was a legal foundation. Webb hadn't written the article to explain Bella. He'd written it to justify what he planned to do next. Whitfield went immediately to Grace. He found her in the boarding house, mending a dress by lamplight, Bella beside her reading quietly like the world hadn't just shifted beneath her feet. Grace saw Whitfield's face and stood up instantly. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the journal. Grace couldn't read all of it, but she understood enough. They were calling her daughter dangerous. "They're going to take her," Grace said quietly. Whitfield didn't deny it. "They may already have the papers," he said. Grace's hands clenched. "I told you," she said, not accusing, just stating fact. "I told you men like this don't stop." Bella looked up from her book. "They're going to put me somewhere," she said. Whitfield swallowed. "Yes." Bella closed the book gently. "An asylum," she said. Whitfield felt a chill. "How do you—" "I've read about them," Bella said. "What they do, what they say they're for, what actually happens." Grace stepped forward, fierce. "No, no one is taking you." But Bella's eyes were distant, not frightened, just calculating. "They don't need your permission," Bella said. "They just need a judge who believes doctors." And in America, judges believed doctors, especially white ones. They had no time. Whitfield tried everything he could. He wrote letters, made calls, contacted colleagues who had witnessed Bella's examination, asked them to speak publicly, to challenge Webb's claims. Some agreed in private. None wanted their names attached. Because Webb's influence was deep, because no one wanted to be known as the man who defended a black child against a respected white professor. Grace talked about leaving, running, disappearing, changing names. But disappear where? Millbrook had eyes, Philadelphia had paperwork, and once a claim like Webb's existed in print, it followed you. Bella knew it too. "They'll find us," she said quietly. And then, one night, she said something that frightened Grace more than fear ever had. "Mama, if they take me, don't fight them." Grace's breath caught. "What? If you fight, they'll hurt you," Bella said calmly. "And it will make it easier for them to say I'm dangerous." Grace shook her head, tears spilling. "I won't let them. You have to listen," Bella said. "If they take me, you have to survive, you have to stay free. Because someone has to get me back." Whitfield couldn't speak, because Bella wasn't guessing. She was preparing. The men came on January 12, 1894. 4 of them, not doctors, not nurses, enforcers with papers. They arrived at 4 in the morning, when fear works best and witnesses sleep. They broke the door open. Grace threw herself between them and Bella's bed without thinking. Screamed, scratched, bit, fought with a fury that came from somewhere older than reason. They knocked her aside like she weighed nothing. Bella woke to chaos. "Mama!" Grace tried to reach her. They restrained Grace while 2 men grabbed Bella, still barefoot, still in her nightgown. Bella didn't scream. She looked at her mother and said the words that would haunt Grace for the rest of her life. "Don't fight them, Mama. Find me." They dragged Bella into the freezing January night. Neighbors watched from doorways. No one moved, because helping a black child against white men with legal authority didn't end in heroism. It ended in funerals. By dawn, Bella Adams officially ceased to exist as a child. On paper, she became a patient, a danger, a case. She was taken to the Pennsylvania State Hospital for the Insane west of Philadelphia, a sprawling complex built on the promise of healing and rotting under the weight of neglect. They processed her like inventory, cut her hair, took her name, assigned her a number, locked her in an 8-by-8 room with stone walls and iron bars. No heat, no comfort, no explanation. Bella sat on the narrow bed and wrapped her arms around her knees. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She recited medical texts in her mind, because memory was still hers, because knowledge was still power, because if they were going to try to break her mind, they would have to catch it first. And Bella Adams had already gone somewhere they couldn't reach. The first thing Bella learned inside the asylum was this time did not move forward there. It pooled, it stagnated, it rotted. Days were not marked by clocks or calendars, but by procedures, by screams echoing down stone corridors, by the changing temperature of the walls against her skin. The Pennsylvania State Hospital for the Insane had been built on the promise that architecture could heal the mind. Wide grounds, symmetry, order. By 1894, it was a lie made of brick. Overcrowding had turned wards into warehouses. Patients weren't treated, they were stored. The violent were chained. The inconvenient were sedated. The quiet ones were forgotten, and black patients were placed where oversight was weakest and records were thinnest. Bella was placed on the colored female ward, a section no visiting board ever inspected closely. Her room was 8 feet by 8 feet, a bed bolted to the floor, a bucket in the corner, a barred window too high to look through properly. No books, no paper, no heat. On the door was her new name, Subject B. She cried only once. It came late on the first night, after the echoes of the ward finally went quiet, after her body began to shake from the cold. She pressed her face into the thin mattress and cried without sound, because crying out loud was dangerous here. Then she stopped, not because the pain faded, but because she understood something essential. Crying did not help you survive, learning did, and Bella Adams had been learning her entire life. They brought her food in the morning, gray slop, cold. She didn't eat it, not out of defiance, but calculation. She knew hunger sharpened the mind for a while, and she needed her mind sharp. Later that day, a nurse arrived with 2 orderlies. They shackled Bella's wrists and ankles before moving her, not because she resisted, but because procedure said they should. She was led down corridors that smelled of damp stone and chemical disinfectant to an examination room in the East Wing. And there he was. Dr. Cornelius Webb. He smiled when he saw her, not cruelly, worse, proudly. "Good morning, Subject B," he said pleasantly. "I trust you're settling in. You lied about me," Bella said. Webb chuckled softly, as if she'd said something charming. "The ravings of disturbed minds often include accusations of persecution," he replied, making a note. "Very common. You put me here because I embarrassed you. Another note. Grandiose thinking. Webb murmured. Delusions of importance. Bella understood then how the game worked. Anything she said would be used as proof against her. Silence might be safer. But Webb leaned closer. You see, he continued, the medical community was quite impressed by your performance, but they lack context. That's what I provide. Bella stared at him.
You're going to study me, she said.
Yes, Webb replied. Extensively. And when you're done, Webb's smile sharpened. You won't be needed anymore. The experiments began quietly. At first, they looked legitimate. Reflex testing, cranial measurements, endurance assessments. Webb measured her skull, her limbs, her posture, looking for physical evidence that her mind was defective. He documented everything with obsessive detail, twisting neutral observations into pathological conclusions. Then the tests changed. Sleep deprivation. They kept Bella awake for days at a time, waking her every hour, then asking questions, hoping fatigue would cause errors. When she answered correctly, Webb grew frustrated. Cold exposure. They placed her in ice baths, timing how long she could endure before her body trembled uncontrollably. He asked her diagnostic questions while her teeth chattered. Electric stimulation. Low at first, then stronger. Every time her answers stayed precise, Webb increased the intensity. Bella learned quickly not to perform. When Webb wanted brilliance, she gave him silence. When he demanded answers, she gave him only what was necessary. She retreated inward, building walls he could not penetrate. And while Webb thought he was breaking her, Bella was mapping the place. She learned the rhythm of the ward, which guards drank on duty, which nurses avoided eye contact, which orderlies enjoyed cruelty and which simply followed orders. She memorized schedules, shift changes, door routines. She listened. The staff spoke freely around her when they thought she was just another broken black child. They talked about the basement, the special research program, patients taken downstairs late at night, experiments not written in official ledgers, men and women who never returned. Bella memorized names, dates, descriptions, because memory was still her weapon, and she was building an arsenal. Grace Adams, meanwhile, was losing her mind outside those walls. She ran to Whitfield first. He was furious but trapped. The commitment papers were legal, signed by a judge who trusted Webb's credentials. Challenging them required medical testimony, and Webb controlled access to Bella. Grace went to lawyers. They shook their heads. A black woman challenging a psychiatric commitment. Impossible. Grace went to newspapers. Editors turned her away. Stories about asylum abuse didn't sell, especially when the victims were black. After 2 weeks of begging and pleading and being ignored, something in Grace changed. She stopped asking the system for permission, and she did the one thing the system never expects. She entered it. Grace Adams applied for work at the asylum. Different name, different history. Widow from Delaware. The hospital was always understaffed, always needed women willing to clean what others wouldn't touch. They hired her without hesitation, assigned her to the colored wards, and just like that, Grace Adams was inside. It took her 3 days to find Bella. The hospital was vast, records sloppy, patients moved without notice, but Grace searched methodically, the way she'd searched for work her whole life, patiently, persistently, without drawing attention. On the 3rd night, she found the door. East wing. Colored female ward. Room with a small barred window. Grace waited, mopped the same floor section over and over until the night guard nodded off. Then she leaned close and whispered, "Bella, baby." "It's Mama." For a moment, nothing happened. Then a face appeared at the window. Thin, pale, hair hacked short, but alive. "Mama?" Bella breathed. Grace pressed her hand against the bars. "They hurt me," Bella whispered. "The doctor. He shocks me, freezes me, won't let me sleep." Grace closed her eyes. "I'm getting you out," she said. "I don't know how yet, but I will." Bella swallowed. "Mama, Dr. Webb isn't just doing this to me. He's doing it to others, mostly colored patients. He takes them to the basement. Some don't come back." Grace felt the shape of something forming. Evidence, leverage, hope. "Can you remember details?" Grace asked carefully. Bella nodded once. "I remember everything." From that moment on, they became co-conspirators. Grace gathered information from the outside, families of patients, staff gossip, unofficial burial grounds on hospital property. Bella gathered information from the inside, names, dates, procedures, conversations. They were building a case, slowly, quietly. Because in a place like this, exposure was the only thing that could save you. And if they failed, no one would ever know Bella Adams existed at all. The hardest part wasn't the pain. Bella learned that quickly. Pain had edges. Pain peaked. Pain ended, at least for a moment. You could endure pain by counting breaths, by retreating inward, by anchoring yourself to something solid inside your mind. The hardest part was watching people disappear. People who arrived angry, people who arrived confused, people who arrived simply sad. They went downstairs. They didn't come back. And no one said their names again. The basement sat beneath the oldest wing of the hospital, where the stone walls were thick and damp, and the air never quite warmed. Bella saw the door only once, from the end of a corridor while being transferred between rooms. It was unmarked, no sign, no record on any official map, but the staff talked, not formally, not carefully. They talked the way people talk when they believe no one important is listening. They called it special research. They joked about it. They complained about the smell. They mentioned how long it took to clean afterward. Bella memorized everything. Who went down? Who escorted them? Which doctors signed off? Which nurses avoided the area afterward? She did not cry anymore. Crying wasted oxygen. Instead, she turned herself into a ledger. Dr. Webb grew increasingly frustrated. Bella stopped performing. When he demanded demonstrations, she answered minimally. When he tried to provoke brilliance, she gave him dullness. When he pushed her into exhaustion, she retreated into silence. This infuriated him. Because Webb did not want a broken child. He wanted a broken theory to rebuild in his own image. You can't hide forever, he told her during one session, adjusting the straps on her wrists. Your mind is what it is. I will document it. Bella looked at him calmly. You can document whatever you want, she said. That doesn't make it true. He slapped her. Not hard enough to leave marks, just hard enough to remind her where power lived. And Bella understood something else then. Webb wasn't trying to learn. He was trying to win. And men who need to win do not stop when facts fail. They escalate. Meanwhile, Grace Adams learned how institutions protect themselves. She scrubbed floors beside women who'd worked there for decades. Women who had learned that survival meant seeing everything and recording nothing. But Grace asked careful questions. She spoke softly. She listened more than she talked. She learned which nurses drank too much, which orderlies bragged, which administrators disappeared paperwork when funding was involved. She learned that Dr. Webb brought in money, grants, donations, prestige. That was why administrators looked the other way. That was why the basement existed. Grace also learned something else. There were graves, unmarked ones, on the western edge of hospital grounds, beyond the paths families were allowed to walk. Bodies listed as transferred. Bodies listed as natural causes. Bodies no one came to claim. Grace began writing names down at home, late at night, by lamplight. Names she heard, dates that didn't match, stories that repeated themselves. She didn't know yet how she would use this information. But she knew one thing: truth was dangerous, but silence was fatal. Bella's chance came in April 1894. A nurse, young, tired, not cruel, forgot to lock a file cabinet in the ward office. Bella was cleaning under supervision. She saw the cabinet, saw the folders. She moved slowly, carefully. She took nothing. She memorized everything: patient lists, transfer dates, handwritten notes marked, special program, signatures that appeared again and again. Dr. Webb's name, always Webb. That night, when Grace whispered through the barred window, Bella spoke quickly. There are records, she said, not official ones, but enough. Names, dates, proof. Grace felt her chest tighten. Can you remember all of it? She asked. Bella nodded. I already have. Grace needed someone who would listen. Not a lawyer, not a judge, a journalist. She found one in the colored press, a man named Samuel Morrison, who wrote for a small Philadelphia paper that white America ignored and black America depended on. Morrison had heard stories before. Asylum abuse, medical cruelty. Most were exaggerated. Some were lies. But Grace didn't come with just grief. She came with names, 47 of them. People who had entered the hospital and vanished. Morrison checked records, and then he checked cemeteries, and then he checked death notices that didn't explain anything at all. The pattern was undeniable. but publishing it was dangerous. White institutions did not respond well to exposure, especially from black journalists. Morrison's editor hesitated. "This could get us shut down," he said. Morrison looked at Grace. "And if we don't print it," he said, "people keep dying." The editor didn't answer, but a week later the presses ran. The article did not scream, it did not accuse directly. It simply laid out facts: unexplained transfers, missing patients, unauthorized procedures, unmarked graves, no names, but enough truth that anyone paying attention could connect the dots. White newspapers ignored it at first, but black churches didn't. Community leaders didn't. Families of missing patients came forward. Pressure built where Webb couldn't fully control it, and institutions hate pressure they didn't plan. On May 5, 1894, the Philadelphia District Attorney announced an investigation into practices at the Pennsylvania State Hospital. On May 12, Dr. Cornelius Webb was suspended. On May 15th, James Whitfield arrived at the hospital with a lawyer and a court order. The commitment papers were fraudulent. The diagnosis was fabricated. The confinement illegal. The administrator didn't fight it. He wanted Webb gone. He wanted the scandal contained. He wanted distance. Bella Adams was released. Grace stood at the gates when Bella walked out, thin, pale, scarred in ways no one could see, but walking. "Mama," Bella whispered. Grace held her like she might disappear again. Behind them, the hospital loomed, unchanged, unapologetic, and Bella understood something that frightened her more than the basement ever had. Webb had been suspended, not destroyed. And men like Webb always come back, unless someone makes sure they don't. Freedom did not feel like freedom at first. Bella stepped through the hospital gates into spring sunlight that felt too bright, too open, like a world she no longer trusted. 4 months inside the asylum had taught her a lesson. She would never forget safety could be taken away with a signature. Grace held her so tightly that Bella could feel her mother's heart racing through her ribs. Grace kept touching her face, her hair, her hands, counting her daughter like someone afraid the numbers might change. Whitfield stood nearby, relieved and shaken. He had won a battle, but not the war. He knew it. Bella knew it, because Dr. Cornelius Webb had not been arrested, only suspended. And men like Webb didn't disappear quietly. The investigation moved slowly, painfully slowly. Institutions protected themselves by delaying until public attention faded. Files went missing. Witnesses suddenly couldn't remember. Administrators claimed ignorance. Webb hired lawyers immediately, men whose job was not truth, but erosion. They attacked the journalist. They attacked the paper. They claimed exaggeration, hysteria, racial agitation. They assumed Bella would remain silent. They were wrong. The trial began in September 1894. The courtroom was packed, not because America cared about asylum abuse, but because a story had escaped containment. A white psychiatrist accused of illegal experiments. A black child at the center of it. A system exposed. The prosecution laid out the evidence carefully. Documents, death records, testimony from families, nurses who spoke once they realized Webb could no longer protect them. Then came the moment Webb's lawyers had tried desperately to prevent. Bella Adams was called to the stand. She walked forward in a simple dress her mother had sewn. Her hair was braided neatly. Her posture was straight, not because she was fearless, but because she understood something essential: fear was what Webb expected. The courtroom fell silent. She was small, young, unmistakably a child. Webb watched her with a frozen expression. He had believed the asylum would erase her. Instead, it had sharpened her. The prosecutor asked her to describe her commitment. Bella spoke clearly. Dates, times, names. She described the procedures without emotion, not because they hadn't hurt, but because accuracy mattered more than sympathy. Webb's lawyers tried to rattle her. They spoke quickly, interrupted, changed subjects. Bella followed every shift without losing her place. When they implied she was mentally unstable, she calmly explained the medical techniques Webb had used, citing textbooks the lawyers had never read. The courtroom shifted. People stopped seeing a child. They started seeing a witness. Then came the basement. The prosecutor asked her what she had seen. Bella closed her eyes, not to remember, but to brace herself. "I saw Dr. Webb perform surgery on a man named Thomas Green," she said. "He was conscious. The doctor said he wanted to see how the brain reacted to pain." The courtroom went still. Bella described it clinically. No dramatics, no embellishment, just facts. Thomas Green screamed for nearly an hour. He died 2 days later, cause of death listed as heart failure. Bella named 23 other patients, not guesses, not rumors, names, dates, procedures, details that matched hospital records line by line. When she finished, Webb's lead attorney asked for a recess. The recess lasted 4 hours. When court resumed, Webb changed his plea, guilty. The sentence came on October 3, 1894. 35 years in prison. Medical license revoked permanently. Published works formally repudiated. The man who had built his career proving black inferiority would die behind bars, disgraced, remembered only as a warning. Bella did not smile. Victory had never been the point. Survival was. After the trial, Bella became something she never wanted to be. A symbol. Newspapers requested interviews. Reformers wanted speeches. Doctors wanted access. Grace and Whitfield protected her fiercely. Bella made her position clear. "I don't want to be famous," she said. "I want to be a doctor." That answer confused people. They wanted inspiration, she wanted work. The obstacles remained enormous. No medical school accepted black women. So Whitfield arranged something unofficial. Panels of physicians examined Bella over the years, documenting her knowledge. At 12, she passed an examination equivalent to licensed physicians, unofficial, but witnessed. At 15, she assisted quietly at Philadelphia General Hospital, never named, never credited, but always correct. Lives were saved because someone listened when she spoke, and slowly, the world shifted. In 1905, at age 21, Bella Adams was admitted to the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. Provisional, conditional watched. She completed 4 years in 2, graduated top of her class. No crowd, no headlines, but she didn't need them. She had the authority she'd fought for since she was 9. Dr. Isabella Grace Adams practiced medicine for 47 years. She diagnosed what others missed, treated who others ignored, trained young physicians who learned that brilliance did not wear one face. She never forgot the asylum. Perfect memory is a double-edged gift. But she did not live in revenge. She lived in proof. When she died in 1952, her obituary called her a pioneer. It did not mention the basement, the straps, the experiments. But history does not belong only to what is printed. It belongs to what is remembered. This was the story of Bella Adams, a child they tried to erase, a woman who refused to disappear, and the lesson she leaves us is not comfortable. Extraordinary minds are still being hidden, still being dismissed, still being punished for existing. The question is not whether another Bella Adams exists. The question is whether we will recognize them, or wait until it's too late. Years later, people would ask how Bella Adams endured it, how a child survived being labeled dangerous, how she survived a place designed to erase names, how she survived the kind of cruelty that was wrapped in education, law, and science. Bella never gave them the answer they wanted, because the truth was uncomfortable. She did not survive because she was fearless. She survived because she learned something most people never do. That fear is not the opposite of strength. Fear is the proof that strength is being tested. After the trial, the world tried to decide what Bella Adams meant. Some called her a miracle. Some called her an exception. Some tried to turn her into proof that the system worked. Because eventually justice came, Bella rejected all of it. Because justice that arrives after a child is tortured is not justice. It is damage control. She understood something most adults refuse to accept. The system had not failed her. The system had done exactly what it was designed to do. And she had survived despite it. Bella did not speak often about the asylum. Not because she had forgotten, she never forgot anything, but because she refused to let the worst men in her life become the loudest voices in her story. She chose medicine. Not as redemption, not as symbolism, as resistance. Every patient she diagnosed correctly was a quiet defiance of the lie that nearly destroyed her. Every life she saved rewrote the sentence men like Webb had tried to carve into her existence. "You are less. You are dangerous. You do not belong," she answered with action. Over and over, for nearly half a century, Grace Adams lived long enough to watch her daughter become something the world had sworn she never could. But Grace never celebrated publicly. She celebrated privately in moments that mattered, watching Bella read medical journals late at night by lamplight, watching patients walk out of clinics alive because Bella noticed what others missed, watching young doctors, white and black, listen when her daughter spoke. Grace knew the truth. The world had not given Bella a future. Bella had taken one. James Whitfield died believing he had done his part. But Bella knew better. He had opened a door. She had walked through fire. And she carried that knowledge into every room she entered for the rest of her life. When Dr. Isabella Grace Adams died in 1952, the obituary was polite, respectful, incomplete. It praised her brilliance. It praised her service. It praised her perseverance. It did not mention the night she was taken barefoot into the cold. It did not mention the straps, the shocks, the basement. It did not mention the child who learned that paper could destroy a life faster than fists. But her mission is not erasure, because stories live longer than ink. And Bella's story survived in quieter places, in the students she taught, in the patients she saved, in the simple, undeniable fact that she existed and succeeded in a world built to prevent exactly that. So what do we do with her story now? We do not turn it into comfort. We do not tell ourselves, that was a long time ago, because the machinery that tried to erase Bella Adams did not vanish. It evolved. It learned to use better language, better credentials, better excuses. It still decides who is gifted and who is dangerous, who deserves opportunity and who deserves surveillance, which minds are nurtured and which are feared. Bella Adams was not rare because of her intelligence. She was rare because she survived long enough to prove the lie wrong. How many others never get the chance? This is why Liturgy of Fear tells these stories, not to reopen wounds, but to expose patterns, because fear has rituals, power has habits, and history repeats itself whenever we pretend it doesn't. Bella Adams did not defeat fear by destroying it. She defeated it by outlasting it, by becoming undeniable, by refusing to shrink. And that is the quiet victory the system can never fully erase. So here is the question we leave you with tonight. Who is being silenced right now, not because they lack ability, but because their ability threatens someone else's certainty? Who is being labeled difficult, unstable, dangerous, or unqualified, because their existence doesn't fit the story we've decided to believe? And when the next Bella Adams stands in front of us, will we listen? Or will we reach for paper titles and locked doors to make the fear go away? This was Liturgy of Fear. Remember her name, Bella Adams. And remember this: some systems don't fear chaos. They fear truth, because truth survives.